Family is perhaps the single most important theme in Fire Emblem Engage. There are numerous sibling duos among the playable cast, as well as some more fringe family relations, like Vander being vaguely related to Clan and Fram, and Citrine being Demont and Alcrest's cousin. Family is also fairly integral to the cast in many other ways too, be it Lapis being embarrassed about her lower-class background, Bunet striving to re-establish his parents' bistro, Anna wanting to reunite with her sisters, or Yunaka not having one. Aaliyah's acknowledgement of the emblems as their family is even the note that the game ends on, which is to say nothing of the fact that Engage's main plot is about Aaliyah reuniting with their sister and killing their father at the behest of their adoptive mother. It is not surprising then that family is integral to the characterization of the game's antagonists as well. The four Hounds are a destructive family unit, that familial bond between them acting as their greatest strength, and their inevitable undoing. This video will analyse 3 of the 4, Zephyr, Briss, and Marnie. Now, this analysis video is going to be a little bit different to the others that I've done. Obviously, I'm going to be covering 3 characters instead of 1, but none of them have support conversations to pull from. In a sense, this analysis will be just as much a plot analysis as it is a character one, if not more so, with a little bit of gameplay analysis added in there too. I feel that it is important to emphasize that this is more of a plot analysis, because I will not be pulling any information from Mauvier, Vale, Celestia, Gregory, or Madeline's support conversations for this video. Only what is present in the base game's main story. Some of you may disagree with that decision, but it is the direction that I decided to go for this video. With so much to cover then, let's start with Marnie. Marnie's role in the Hounds family unit is obvious. She's the loud, annoying, and braggadocious little sister in constant need of praise and validation from everyone around her. Her craving for praise is effectively the crux of Marnie's entire character. As she tells us in Chapter 21, Marnie was abandoned by a mother that held no love for her, and as a consequence of this abuse, Marnie developed a pretty personality-defining complex about it. Marnie is very forthcoming with how much she loves getting praised by Zephyr, and this gives us a clear reason why Marnie would have joined and stayed with the Hounds. Zephyr is the perfect stand-in for her own biological mother, their family's matriarch, who is more than willing to give Marnie all the praise she never received from her birth mother. But as a consequence of this, Marnie is willing to do just about anything to earn said praise. This obviously manifests itself in Marnie's eagerness to fight in Somron's name, but this flaw of hers proves to be the thread that ends up unraveling the Hounds. Desperate to impress after multiple losses, in Chapter 19, Marnie steals 2 emblem rings to use against the Divine Dragon, and her subsequent loss of them proves to be what ultimately sways Mauvier to abandon the Hounds after Zephyr punishes them to a degree that he simply finds unacceptable. And we all know what happens from there. Marnie too is swayed against Zephyr, and she is once again tossed aside by the mother she only desired to please. All said, Marnie's character is very simple. Aside from outright saying that Marnie's yearning for praise from Zephyr is due to wanting that validation from a mother figure in her life, this entire section has essentially just been a recounting of events that happen in the plot. I actually see this as a pro in how Marnie is written. As I mentioned prior, her relationship with Zephyr is integral to how the Hounds fall apart. Making this relationship easy to understand and follow is something of a necessity, but, of course, Marnie has another incredibly important relationship with one of her fellow Hounds, her relationship with Mauvier. Actually describing the relationship between these two was surprisingly difficult, so I think a practical example can demonstrate it for me. In every single one of Marnie and Mauvier's appearances as enemies, they are always paired together. Technically this is true as far back as Chapter 11, but in their first real appearance in Chapter 14, they are together with Zephyr. In Chapters 16 and 19, they fight side by side, and even in Chapter 17, they move as a duo. The game design makes it pretty clear. There's a special connection between these two. But how obvious is that textually? At first glance, it's almost non-existent. Yes, Zephyr pairs them together for chapters 16 and 19, but the dialogue exchange between the two seems far from loving. As many would likely expect from the two's conflicting personalities, Mauvier comes across as rather dismissive of Marnie's bravado in both of these chapters, perhaps even a little insulting too, and Marnie doesn't exactly seem like Mauvier's biggest fan either. This is to such a degree that their bonds suddenly becoming spotlighted in chapter 21 almost feels somewhat out of place, with Marnie clearly lamenting the reality of Mauvier leaving the Hounds behind, and Marnie's death being the final catalyst for Mauvier joining Aaliyah's side. However, I do believe that the textual evidence supporting their bond is there, albeit subtly. When Marnie is talking with Mauvier in both chapters 16 and 19, there is one little word that clearly conveys Marnie's affection, at least. We'll be heroes. We're Lord Sombron's favourites. For someone like Marnie, who has such a one-track mind towards being personally decorated with praise, it strikes me as interesting that she also includes Mauvier in there. I equally find it interesting that this is only true when the two are alone, or at least not facing down their enemies, since when introducing themselves in chapter 19, Marnie takes the spotlight for herself and dismisses Mauvier's presence entirely. She puts on the selfish bravado when they have an audience, but when it's just the two of them, she seems eager to share the spotlight with Mauvier. But a few words aren't enough to demonstrate this by themselves, so it's quite helpful that chapter 19 also provides us with some actions that do. If Marnie was just selfishly pursuing praise, was there really a need to steal 2 emblem rings? Surely securing just the one for herself would be more than enough. Better, even, as having the sole ring in this battle would not only suggest that Marnie is, in some way, superior to Mauvier in terms of rank, but having a ring would also allow her to lead the charge, thus taking credit for their assumed victory. Instead, she also gives one to Mauvier, putting the two of them on equal footing. I hesitate to outright say that Marnie is effectively a tsundere for Mauvier with all of this considered, but I can't deny that I am somewhat implying it. With all this in mind, Marnie's sudden behavioural shift towards Mauvier in chapter 21 feels a little more justified. While it could be argued that what makes Marnie so obviously sad at the end of this scene is the general idea that her perfect family, the one she had always wanted, was in any way about to fracture, I firmly believe that it is specifically the idea of losing Mauvier that upsets her. Marnie does love being a part of the Hounds. She does love the found family that was given to her there, but I think her love for Mauvier does surpass what she feels for Zephyr and Gris, perhaps because at some level she knows that what she has with Mauvier is real. We'll cover Gris in time, but it's obvious that Zephyr's heaping of praise is entirely manipulative. She knows exactly what will control Marnie, and she uses that to her advantage. But Mauvier? He doesn't put on airs. Even if Marnie says that she wants praise more than anything else, what she really desires is a real family, a real place to belong. And Mauvier is real. He doesn't just tell her what she wants to hear, he doesn't feed her ego, but he does genuinely care. Even if it was partially to protect Vale, he does try and cover for Marnie after they lose Roy and Micaiah's rings, figuratively and literally, and even though it should be against his better judgment, he lets Marnie return to Zephyr's side in chapter 21, because that's where he believes she will find happiness. Mauvier isn't great at showing it, but he does deeply care. But perhaps it is that fact that results in Marnie's death at all. In their chapter 23 battle dialogue, Zephyr is surprised to hear Mauvier speak fondly of the Hounds as his family. Logically then, we can assume that Marnie, despite her own affections, would not have been sure that Mauvier did really care about her. Considering her fixation on praise, Marnie clearly places a greater priority on verbal forms of affection. She needs to hear out loud that people care about her. But that is the one thing someone like Mauvier could never provide her. It just isn't in his nature. If it was, and their bond was so obviously mutual, maybe Marnie wouldn't have gone back to Zephyr's side. Maybe she would have stayed with him. Maybe she wouldn't have died in his arms. The real tragedy in Marnie's death is twofold. The aforementioned preventability of it. If only Marnie and Mauvier could have more clearly communicated how they felt about each other, but also in that it cuts Marnie's story short. Marnie is fundamentally a good person who was led astray by Zephyr, who took advantage of her past trauma to mold her into a tool that would carry out any task so long as her insincere praise was attached. Marnie's final act is a rebellion against that. She disobeys Zephyr and tries to save Vale. It is a moment of redemption that does pay off. The damage Marnie does to the helmet does help in eventually freeing Vale, but it's a redemption that Marnie never lives to see. She dies believing that she failed, killed by the woman she so desperately wanted to be the mother she never had, passing in the arms of someone who could never truly communicate just how much they cared. Interestingly though, that desire for a mother-daughter relationship should have gone both ways. Just like with Marnie, family is integral to Zephyr's character, perhaps even more so. And yet not only with Mauvier, but also when Gris tells her that he saw the Hounds as a family, it catches Zephyr off guard. She, the person who not only introduces the Hounds as her family in Chapter 10, and frequently repeats the idea throughout the course of the story, is surprised that Gris saw them as a family. How could that possibly be the case? For Zephyr, we have to start at the end. Her final appearance in the story, Chapter 24, gives us all the context we need to reframe the entirety of Zephyr's character. As the last of the mage dragons, Zephyr had no real idea of what it meant to be or have a family. While she definitely knew her parents, it does not seem as if she had any real memory of them beyond that. And so her only frame of reference for what a family should be like was certified Dad of the Year Sombron. To Sombron, children are endlessly obedient, ultimately disposable pawns to be used, discarded, and created as necessary. So with no other point of view to base her own on, Sombron's view informed Zephyr's feelings about what it means to be a family. This is also evident in both chapters 23 and 24, where Zephyr outright states that her desire to have a child with Sombron had no love behind it. She wanted to have a child, simply to have a child. Of course, this is not to argue that Zephyr's interest in having a child with someone she did not love is in any way equatable to Sombron's use and abuse of children as weapons of war, but it does suggest that Zephyr, like Sombron, views the idea of having a child as something akin to a personal convenience. If you desire a child, you can simply have one. Nothing more to it. Obviously, the worst of this mentality manifests itself in how Zephyr treats Marnie. When Marnie is useful to her, she lathers her with love and praise, and as soon as Marnie defies her, she is disposed of without a second thought. It's quite the cruel reality that Marnie and Zephyr have by far the most toxic relationship of any of the Hounds, and yet they both fulfill a need the other craves. Zephyr serves as the mother Marnie always wanted, and Marnie stands in as the child Zephyr never had. Though less extreme, she also takes this attitude with Mauvier. His obedience and loyalty to her is what she values, and he will only receive her love while that loyalty and obedience continues. Cruelty is perhaps Zephyr's most defining trait. Following her introduction in Chapter 5, she outright kills Nilus for failing his mission, and proudly declares it in Chapter 10 too. Then, of course, comes the abuse she inflicts upon the Hounds and Vale across the rest of the story. However, this does not seem to be entirely behaviour adopted directly from Sombron. Without a doubt, he had his influence on Zephyr's general cruelty, but her final conversation with Vale in Chapter 23 hints that there may well be another factor that contributed to said cruelty. In this chapter, Zephyr tells Vale and Alir that they too will end up like her as a consequence of their long lives. Paired with her brief remark in Chapter 24 about not getting attached to Sombron's many children, it is abundantly clear that Zephyr's long life of loss has jaded her to the point where she cannot truly form bonds anymore. Despite still yearning for a family to call her own, she knows that she will ultimately outlive all of her loved ones, compounding her fear of loss even further. This actually sets Zephyr in contrast to Vale and Alir, two others who did survive the war 1,000 years ago before the start of the game. But unlike the two of them, Zephyr was not cast into slumber. Considering the persecution that Vale mentions she suffered upon waking because she was Sombron's daughter, it's very difficult to imagine Zephyr's life was peaches and roses during the 1,000-year interval as someone who fought by Sombron's side. Little if any information is given about Zephyr's personal experiences during this time, so we can only speculate on what her life was like. But whatever the case may be, it is easy to assume that centuries of paranoid isolation deepened her desire to not get too attached to people, and could facilitate the growth of her cruelty. This could even explain why she is so exceptionally cruel to Vale in particular, though this is also technically true for Alir as well. While yes, she is under Sombron's orders to get Vale under their control, Vale represents everything that Zephyr had taken from her. At least as far as Zephyr is concerned. Because Vale had the luxury of sleeping for nearly 1,000 years, she retained her capacity for growth, love, and the ability to connect with others, something she immediately puts into action with Mauvier when she wakes up for the first time, earning her the unyielding loyalty of someone Zephyr could not. But this is in addition to the other thing Vale represents. As the youngest of Sombron's children, Vale is a living what might have been for Zephyr. Much like she spiked Sombron in the end, she's not above venting her frustrations out on a child she may well wish was hers. With all of that said though, there's still something missing. That initial question of how Zephyr could possibly be surprised that Gris considered her family should make even less sense with everything that I have argued about her. Yes, she may struggle to form genuine connections, but surely that would make her even more like Sombron? She views the other Hounds as means to an end, as tools to be used and discarded at will, which is exactly the type of family that Sombron fostered. In theory, there should be no surprise that Gris considers them family. They are the exact sort of abusive and dysfunctional group Zephyr was conditioned to view as family. Perhaps with one slight wrinkle. Sombron's description of family in Chapter 24 is very much about blood family. To him, blood family is the only type. Likely because of the inherent loyalty that implies, and that his children, being able to summon emblems, would simply have more inherent value to him as soldiers. This could then explain her inability to view the Hounds as a real family until one of them says so to her face. Zephyr's concept of family is rigid. She has Sombron's example to follow and little else. And as such, anything that slightly deviates from her preconceived notion of family must not be a real family. The tragic irony there being that she is the only one who thinks that way. Gris, Marnie, and even Mauvier all considered each other found family, but in the same way that Mauvier's inability to communicate with Marnie had a hand in her death, the greater lack of communication between any of the Hounds that they have genuine affection for each other ultimately leads to their disbandment and deaths. This is even true of Sombron. His entire motivation is caught up in Zero Emblem and his relationship with them. a found family relationship for certain. This again puts Zephyr in thematic contrast to Alear too. Despite their reunion with their blood family being an important part of the plot, their found family relationship with Lumera, the rest of the playable cast, as well as the emblems, is crucial to the main themes of the game. Zephyr's refusal to form connections is a fault entirely of her own creation. But most importantly, it's something she profoundly fails at doing. While she may not have viewed the Hounds as her family, it does seem like she held at least some genuine affection for them. In her battle dialogue with Mauvier in Chapter 23, she gives him the option to leave the battlefield. Quite surprising considering the ruthlessness she otherwise displays. And her dialogue with Vale is so aggressively goading, telling her how much she always hated her, and yet also believed that Vale would find the strength to turn against her. It comes across almost as if Zephyr is purposely trying to get Vale to strike her down. And considering the slight degree of remorse that comes through in the post-battle scene, perhaps she had become somewhat attached to Vale, and this roundabout way of encouraging her was just another way she could spite Sombron when she knew he had finally thrown her aside. But far and away the biggest indicator that Zephyr could still become attached to someone is her relationship with Gris. Whereas Marnie and Mauvier are one duo within the Hounds, Gris and Zephyr are another. Gris is seemingly the one that Zephyr trusts above all else. His absence from the Chapter 14 battle at Sol Palace, for example, is revealed in Chapter 15 to be because Zephyr entrusted him with the very important task of tracking down Vale. Gris is the one Zephyr lets in on all of the finer details of Sombron's plans, from abandoning Elusia to rebuild Gradlon, to Alear's likely identity as Sombron's lost child. He's even the one left behind in Elusia to confirm it in Chapter 20. Arguably most interesting, though, is that Gris is also the one Hound Zephyr never punishes. Despite how eager he is to receive physical pain, she never lays a finger on him, of all people. In part, Gris goes unscathed because he is everything that Zephyr sought in her Hounds. He is loyal and unquestioningly obedient. On the surface, Gris is by far the simplest member of the Hounds. He comes across as the unhinged lunatic whose love for inflicting pain on others is rivaled only by his love for receiving it. Unlike all the others, his backstory is left almost entirely ambiguous outside of a few lines in Chapter 23. He's the type of character that is entirely, unabashedly villainous, with no greater depth than that. But that little monologue he has in Chapter 3 as he and Zephyr lay dying depicts him as something wholly different. He's strangely grounded and endearingly loyal. He truly saw the Hounds as a family, the whole unit as a family, and states it with a confidence that no other Hound ever does. With Gris's relative absence from the story compared to the other Hounds, this is the one scene he really gets to show off any deeper layers to his character. Gris's overwhelming sense of loyalty was the quality I transitioned into this final part of the analysis with, and it is effectively the one quality his entire character revolves around. Here, he reveals that his obsession with inflicting pain upon himself was not just an overblown masochistic tendency, it was a display of his faith in his god. In Gris's eyes, inflicting pain on himself was the only way he could receive the attention and blessings of the god he worshipped. A god long dormant that could never answer his prayers. This may well be why his devotion to Zephyr is so strong. With his god failing to answer his prayers, a new guiding light entered his life. A real presence, not an intangible god beyond his reach. A presence so strong that he who was once a disciple all but turned his back on that god, in favor of Zephyr. Sombron's physical presence is most likely what encourages Gris to indulge in his pain obsession during the game. Now that his god is actually present, it would be in his and his family's best interests to appease that god. And for Gris, personal pain and suffering is the only thing that he believes could pacify Sombron. However, this masochistic mask that Gris puts on, likely in defense of his family, also actively sabotages his relationships with them. Despite Gris's genuine love for his family, not a single one of them can see it. Zephyr is the most overt one, as we've already covered, but this is critical to his relationship with Marnie as well. I already argued that Marnie has a great affection for Mauvier because what he gives her is real, not something put on. Gris, despite his love for Marnie, is not ever himself. He's too concerned with playing the character he believes Sombron will look favourably upon. Even with Mauvier, when Gris actually calls them brothers, it comes across as very sarcastic and disingenuous, despite the fact that Gris did genuinely seem to view Mauvier that way. Albeit far more indirectly than with Zephyr, Sombron once again proves that his influence can only ruin families. However, loyal to Sombron he is not. His apparent willingness to switch sides like Mauvier does tells us outright that Gris's piety left long ago. His only real allegiance was to the big sister, mother, and new god he now followed. His battle dialogue with Alear in chapter 23 establishes this too, where he takes great offense to the idea that he or Zephyr would have been forced into battle there. Considering his lack of loyalty to Sombron, however, the thing that Gris most likely takes offense with here is the insinuation that he was forced to stay by Zephyr's side. The idea that he would willingly choose to be anywhere else is enough to draw out his only truly vitriolic outburst in the entire game. Gris, with his lack of screen time compared to the other Hounds, is certainly more straightforward than the others in many ways, but he is by no means any less complete. All of the scenes he does get leads up to his chapter 23 monologue. The tasks he completes for Zephyr and his status as the one allowed into her inner circle is evidence enough of that, but so too is his reaction to Marnie's death. It's the only moment his mask really slips outside of chapter 23. It almost seems out of character for a man so obsessed with suffering to just turn away without so much as a snicker. So, with all that said about the Hounds, why don't they work? Or rather, why, despite the fact that they are all very complete, well-established characters that serve the main themes of the game perfectly, does the wider community not have a great affinity for them? Ignoring the sentiment that Engage's writing and characters are inherently bad, therefore they are bad, I think that there is something that massively holds the Hounds back as characters. Presentation. Almost everything I discussed in this analysis happens between chapters 19 and 24. While one may say that this is a pacing issue, I actually do not think that saving a lot of this information for the tail end of the game is necessarily a bad choice. After all, as I have argued for each of the Hounds discussed in this essay, their appearances across the entire game back up all the concrete information we learn about them in these last few chapters. Even so, the way all of this information is presented has some critical flaws. Without massively overhauling the narrative, though, how could this have been fixed? The whole group undeniably suffers due to their gameplay presence. They unfortunately fit all too cleanly into the "I've been defeated, but I can't fall here" meme, which is enough to damage a player's view of them if they're aware of fandom memes, but this does have genuine consequences beyond that. If they appear as bosses too frequently, the player is far less likely to view them as a genuine threat, and thus dismiss them as annoyances. on and off the battlefield. Their first appearance in Chapter 11 is obviously vital in making them seem threatening, so that should remain untouched. Chapter 14 also handles them perfectly, serving the dual purpose of not only indicating to the player that you're ready to take on these previously undefeatable foes, but also showcasing the deeper trust that Zephyr has in Gris due to his absence. Chapter 17 would be a far inferior chapter without all of them present, but having Marnie and Mauvier also be the bosses of Chapter 16 is a bit much. It makes logical sense that they would personally go out to track down an Emblem ring rather than leave it to their subordinates, but this is the first time their inclusion as bosses feels arbitrary, despite the importance of the story scenes between Marnie and Mauvier that are in this chapter. Chapter 19 is a great final battle with Marnie and Mauvier, and Chapter 20 is another chapter that communicates the greater trust Zephyr has in Gris, and far more overtly this time too. Zephyr and Gris's exclusion from Chapter 21 would not make much logical sense contextually, and they of course need their own final battle in the form of Chapter 23. With the game structured as is, it would be difficult to justifiably remove any of the Hounds from the battles that they are in, but the fatigue players may feel from battling them repeatedly is also undeniable. With that being the case, the presentation of their characters in the story itself needs the greater scrutiny. Zephyr, on the whole, suffers the least from the presentation issues. Zephyr's character does not have a sudden heel turn, nor does she hide a significant part of her true self in a way that the player cannot easily interpret. Her cruel, domineering persona is consistent throughout her every appearance, and her treatment of the other Hounds as tools perfectly sets up the fact that even though she calls them her family, she cannot truly see them that way. If anything, maybe it should have been made clear before Chapter 23 that she did still yearn for familial connection, though. As is, in the moment it can feel nonsensical that Zephyr is confused by Gris calling them family, even if it makes sense with all of the context of her character. It's just that crucial pieces of that context come in Chapter 24, after that scene in 23. The main problem with Gris is that because his unyielding loyalty to Zephyr and love for the Hounds as a family is something he keeps well hidden, it's well hidden from us. Despite the love he supposedly has for his found family, he barely interacts with any of them aside from Zephyr. Again, it is to serve a purpose, but that does not exclude this oversight. Marnie and Zephyr have clear roles in their family unit, but Gris does not. Just by looking at the Hounds, you'd think he would be the older brother, and Mauvier would fill the role of father, completing the traditional nuclear family formation that they may have been going for. But Gris says he saw Mauvier as more of a brother, putting all three of them as Zephyr's children. Perhaps they were going for that sort of dynamic, Marnie as the attention-seeking youngest child, Gris as Zephyr's favourite, and Mauvier as the stoic older brother, but Gris's actual placement in the family unit is so nebulous that it's difficult to say for certain. There doesn't even have to be anything too significant. Anything at all would suffice for a character like Gris. As just one suggestion, why don't we take a look at the first scene Gris is introduced in. It is borderline blank and you'll miss it, but he and Marnie first appear in Chapter 9, when Hyacinth tells him to carry off Morion's body. Maybe even giving Gris and Marnie one extra line in this scene, where they tease or bicker like siblings, would be more than enough, because without it, his relationships with Marnie and Mauvier are shockingly bare bones. I do think that it is important to mention that the Hounds by no means have to adhere to a traditional nuclear family unit to be valid as a family unit. I just wanted to use that framing to help establish the absence of Gris's interpersonal relationships with the other Hounds. Marnie, however, is the one that suffers the most from poor presentation. Interestingly, the first problem she faces is that there is far too much show and not enough tell when it comes to her character. Too significant a portion of her relationship with Mauvier is left for the player to glean from little things like them always appearing on maps together or having linked AI. More scenes with just the two of them, like the one in chapter 16, could have greatly benefited their dynamic. But at least all of the necessary information is there in the base game, even if it isn't as overt as it really ought to be. Far more egregiously, it's Marnie's backstory. The backstory itself is fantastic, and it explains her behaviour throughout the rest of the game perfectly. But it comes out of almost nowhere and heralds a drastic shift in Marnie's character. Prior to this, Marnie is, frankly, incredibly unlikable to most players. She is a loud, whiny brat who revels in violence and murder in a way that is not easily redeemable. And yet, as soon as she reveals her tragic backstory, she suddenly becomes far more empathetic and self-aware, traits that manifest out of absolutely nowhere. Her death sequence in chapter 21 feels somewhat disingenuous because of this, and really drags down what really should have been a poignant turning point in the story of the Hounds. Perhaps the best answer to this issue would simply have been to make Marnie recruitable. Vale is, after all, the only royal sibling with one retainer, and if she was recruitable, Marnie could have been allowed to bond and empathise with Vale in a more organic way through their support, much like Hortensia does with Vale. However, I think a more effective way to make Marnie appear more likeable without fundamentally changing too much would be to play more heavily into her apparent desire to be a hero, and the fact that she genuinely believes that what she is doing is right, presenting her more as a blissfully ignorant child who's being manipulated by her corrupt maternal figure could theoretically make her a more likeable character, or at least a little more sympathetic. Ultimately, the Hounds are complete characters, all of whom are compelling as narrative foils to the main cast and the themes of family when they are taken in their totality. However, poor presentation of this context and information is what left the four Hounds so close to perfection. So, was that ending a little too cheesy? With having the title in there as the final line? Yay, nay? Ah, well, video's already out. So, that's the end of the analysis. Thank you so much for watching. This is a long one. A very long one. When I sat down to start writing this, I knew it was going to be long, but I did not expect it to be 1,000 words longer than the Hortensia essay, and I've got to be honest. Well, not that you'd know this, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to out myself for this. I'd originally hoped to have this video out before Christmas. It's nearly March. Well, no, probably. I think it'll be nearly March when I actually release this video. It's not like right now as I'm recording this, but I think it will be when it goes up. But yeah, I've been, as a university student, over the past month, I have written a combined total of nearly 15,000 words across multiple essays, and I gotta be honest, I'm a little burnt out at the moment. Just a little bit. And I think, I don't know, there's another one of those I'm always like my worst critic, aren't I, in all of these. It's like, I don't know. Like, there's so much extra information I already have. Like, there's so many things I want to talk about with the Hounds that I just didn't in this analysis. Some of the things I kind of want to say verge a little too heavily on, the slightly more pretentious video essay angle, if you know what I mean. I don't know. Is anyone really here in what's technically a plot/character analysis of the Four Hounds? Does anyone really want to hear me talk about, like, family psychology? I mean, it's relevant, but, you know, considering that I don't know anything about family psychology, it's a bit pretentious and would feel a bit shoehorned in, you know? But I do also have some things to say about it. And, like, power structures, the fact that they're even called the Hounds and what that implies. Like, there are a lot of little things that I still have to say, but I mean, that's the case with all of the videos I do. I say this at the end of every analysis that I do in this end card segment, that I never really want to have the final say on character analysis. You know, I like this as a community thing. I should not be the guy who figured out the X character, you know? And that goes for the Hounds as well, you know? I as much as I have things to say about them, I think I've said enough here, and yeah, I have more ideas and things to say, but I'm a little more interested in what you guys have to say, especially because with this one being a little more not like drastically different, but a little different to how I usually do things with, you know, my opinion. I mean, even in the title, it's kind of my opinion, more so than just a vague summation of kind of what I'm looking at in the video. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear your guys' opinions on the Four Hounds. Maybe the things that you would change, maybe the things that you wouldn't change, how you like them / dislike them as they are already. You know, the same, the usual stuff. You know, it's funny actually. I've kind of been thinking about doing something kind of like this. But I don't know, it's still very much an infant idea at the moment of having like I don't know, not like I guess it would end up being filmed like a podcast, but I don't know, like almost like a Q&A kind of thing, where I could have a video where I more directly discuss some of like your guys' opinions on the characters I've looked at. Because that's my favourite thing about these videos, and going into the comments and looking at what you guys have to say. Even in the case of the Hortensia video, where, and rightfully so might I say, that quite a few people in their own analyses were fairly critical of what I had to say about Hortensia. Which, you know, I think rightfully so. I in retrospect, I do have a lot of problems with that video. I don't think it's one that I'll redo or anything anytime soon. It's not like that egregious, but I do definitely have my problems with it, and I don't know, it's one of those things where you can kind of, you can see it right from the get-go, right? Like, despite the fact that it has, like, half of the views of the Saline video, it has, I think, more than double the dislikes, which, I mean, okay, sure, neither video has, like, double-digit dislikes. Like, it's not that much, but it's still noticeable, right? I can still see that there's a bit more critique towards me, less so than, like, oh, Engage's writing is bad, shut up, you... this video is pointless. Which was the majority of what I got on the Saline video, in terms of negative comments. I think, yeah, I think the Hortensia video, I had a lot of really interesting analysis, and while I did, like, defend what I had to say, I did find it really interesting what some of you guys had to say, and I don't know, maybe, see, I don't know how I do this, though, where I feel like a YouTube comment isn't really the way to go with that. Like, I've considered maybe having, like, I guess, like, a business email or something for this channel, where you could, like, send things, well, not just for that, well, probably just for that, I don't know what else I'd use it for. Well, who knows, maybe the next analysis video will be sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Fingers crossed! Yeah, no, like, I don't know, I feel like it'd be more, I don't know, pros and cons of it being more personal than, like, a Google form. I don't know, as I said, it's like an infant idea, where it's like, I like the community aspect of analysis, I don't know, character appreciation, I suppose. So I'd kind of like to do something like that, and that's not really something that people do, either. The closest is, oh yeah, I'm gonna go on this thread on Reddit and read out people's opinions, you know? That's kind of the closest it comes to that. Or sometimes it'll be, oh yeah, I polled my viewers to get a general opinion on this thing, but I'm not really going to discuss those opinions specifically unless, I don't know, it like provides a general backup to my point. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to stop talking about it actually, because I don't know. I don't have anything further to say on that, because again, it's an infant idea. So, before I send you off for the people who did stay back to listen to this, listen to my insane ramblings, the next 2 analysis videos I do already have planned. I know what the next 2 are going to be, and I can give you a rough time frame in which they will come out. So, I mean, I feel like I have to after doing this video. The next character analysis is going to be for Mauvier. Yay! I say that very dry. I really like Mauvier. I'm quite excited to do it, but I don't know why I said that so dryly, to be honest. So yeah, he's next. Shouldn't be 6 months between this video and that one. It will be, I believe, it'll come out end of April, beginning of May. Should be when that video comes out. And then, and I know there's someone in the audience who's excited to hear this. I think after that, I have to like cap off this miniature arc, I guess, with a Veil analysis. I feel like I have to do Veil as well. And that video should come out in, I want to say August, potentially July. We'll see. We sure will see. I've got a lot of other essays to write, so yeah, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think that's it. I don't think I have anything else to say. I don't have any more insane ramblings to go on. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I genuinely can't believe that at this point it was a year ago that I posted the Saline analysis, and now I know I've only done 1/2 more in the time since, but I kind of did think that the Saline video was going to be a one-off thing that like no one watched, but I enjoyed making, and it's the most successful probably thing I'll ever do. Let's be real. I'm just some guy. And hey, that's awesome, you know? I love that, and I've really enjoyed doing these videos as well. I'm excited to keep on doing them. I don't know what I'm going to do after the Veil video, to be honest. I don't know. Maybe I'll move on to a different game. Maybe I'll continue doing Engage analysis. Maybe I'll dip my toes into like some different types of content. I mean, if you guys are here for Fire Emblem Engage specifically, there's a couple of things I could do that's not just like, oh yes, let me tier list the cast or whatever. I don't know, or maybe that is my job, you know? Maybe I will be the guy who like creates the definitive tier list for like each emblem. Like, who's the best emblem users? Tier listed categorically. And in extreme amounts of detail. Who knows, maybe I will be that guy. That's not really my cup of tea, but maybe I will be that guy. I did also, about a year ago now, but I'm doing the Felzino log at the moment, at the time of writing this. I did also do a Maddening Iron Man about a year ago. And part of me is like, oh, maybe it'd be fun to do like a post-op? Is that the right turn of phrase? Just like going over my experience with it, what I did, what I kind of found out about the game, and how much I surprisingly enjoyed it. But also, since I'm doing the Felzino log, I could also talk about that. Grotto, I'm not Iron Manning the Fel Xenologue. That would be absolutely insane. On Maddening, that'd be absolutely insane. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe if you guys are interested in a video like that, I could do something like that. Yeah, I guess that was actually something more, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. For realsies this time. See you in the next one. Here on screen, probably right now, hopefully right now, or maybe in a couple of seconds, or Iron Man highlights that I've put out recently. Maybe I've got Saline on here as well. Maybe I've got a mix of all. So yeah, click on those if you want. If not, hey, I'll see you around, hopefully. For a little bit of Mauvier in a couple of months' time. Until then, goodbye.